I would like to introduce Christina Hoffman. Chris is actually the global head of medical affairs for Medscape, and I think she has a great topic to kick us off today with market assessment to fuel actionable insights in medical affairs. So take it away, Chris. I appreciate you getting up early in Colorado Springs.
Thanks a lot, Christina. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Well, I do have the topic to address today, but I also am going to be asking for some audience participation. So even in the middle of this presentation, so stay tuned for a question that I'm going to have for you all, and we'll ask you to contribute to the chat with your responses. But as Kristen said, we really want to talk today about fueling insight. The agenda that I have for this session looks like this: reviewing the third pillar strategy that Med Affairs can and really deserves to be within every one of the organizations out there. Talking about what makes an insight actionable, talking about intentionality, constructing an approach to this whole entire thing, and looking at a framework about how to think about actionable insights. So buckle up, because this is what's ahead of us today. Many of you have undoubtedly seen this and are comfortable with, but I just wanted to ground us in this McKinsey report of vision for medical affairs in 2025. And while that is 4 years away, I would say to you that we have the capabilities now to start to become the third strategic pillar within the pharmaceutical device and biotech industry, alongside our colleagues in commercial as well as clinical development. And the reason, or the way to really fully actualize on that potential, is for the function to bring the vast amount of data to the table. And we see this in this report, really just talking about, and the keys obviously are underlined here: the need for evidence, combining, analyzing, and interpreting disparate data sets, which of course you've got to have some sophisticated tools to do that, right? We're really talking AI here, and the ability for AI to find signals in the noise, and then using those insights, creating those insights and sharing those insights across the organization, so that it's not just simply for the benefit of the Med Affairs function, but for the other, pardon me, other strategic pillars within the organization. So hopefully today we'll have an opportunity to see a path to make that happen, if it's not already happening in your organizations. This cartoon, let's shrink big data into small data and hope it magically becomes great data, is really kind of all too often the approach. And I am going to be asking you all this question in a moment. As far as you're concerned, what makes an insight actionable? And what I'm proposing is a little bit of a thought-provoking approach here, which is something is going to be actionable to an organization if it, one, confirms, two, refines, or establishes a de novo approach. So we'll just loosely call all of any of those things together collectively credible findings. You see how we're sort of picking those up. And I'm just wondering if you all might, in the chat box right now, enter something that you have either seen, heard, or want to see or hear that you think makes something actionable. So everybody go to the chat box real quickly. What is an actionable insight as far as you're concerned? And I'll just give a couple seconds there just to see if we can get a few things dropped in there. All right, good. Yeah, so addressing an unmet need in a novel way, that is absolutely an actionable insight. Anyone else want to contribute to that? Kevin, thanks for dropping that one in there. Good, yeah, new data that's going to reestablish a reaffirm. It doesn't actually have to change the course. It just needs to make sure that the course is accurate. So yes, absolutely there. So as we think about how do we get there, right? And I want to offer a question or offer a thought process. We just definition, right? What makes something intentional, done on purpose and deliberate? What I think very often happens in med affairs is we think about some of the knowledge transfer that we have to do, and we say, my goal for this knowledge transfer is to increase understanding or awareness or what have you. But the reality is there is probably a bigger goal ultimately, a KPI, which has to be thought about, a big action, something that can be not only um, sort of demonstrated with pre versus post test, but actually can be measured ultimately when it's said and done across behaviors. And there's a number of kinds of things we can talk about there, and we will in just a moment talk about what some of those types of behaviors we're talking about. What are the KPIs we should be thinking about in context with education that you're thinking about, and do those things, if you will, and look to make those impacts and measure those things along the way. This is the section here that is we'll call constructing an approach. And as I said, it is really what we're thinking about is knowledge transfer, which is one of the big rocks that Med Affairs is responsible for delivering on, and insight generation. And not thinking about those as separate things, but thinking about conveying insights while working to transfer knowledge. All right, so here is the approach. First of all, establish the goal, the KPI of your disease state education, and that's what DSE is standing for here. And here's one I'm just going to play with for now. Let's say it's increasing the diagnosis of something, right? That's a fairly straightforward example, and one I would imagine many of you can, it will resonate with and can appreciate. Then identify targets for that education by using ICD-10 or CPT codes or HCPC codes, for instance. Now, I realize that that's a US-centric ability. I'm using that as an example, and there are other ways to identify targets that are outside the United States, but we're going to carry on with this, just the thought process here. You invite those targets to your disease state education event. And we're going to call that event, we're going to say that this event happens to be something that's occurring at a Congress. So whether it's a symposia or it's a disease state theater, sitting in a slot for a product theater, and we're going to call that event T, right? So T plus and minus time, using some sort of space talk here for a moment. And here's the thing, we'll have invited a number of people to this event, and the event is going to have RSVPs and attendees. And while you might, and certainly we would be disappointed that not everyone who RSVPs attends, what an RSVP tells you is that you actually have hit a good chord with that person. That person is interested in hearing more about this. So they are leaning into it. So again, while an RSVP isn't an attending an event, it is a sensitizing experience to have them be invited and whether they show or not, right? And so cohort A is people who attend, and cohort B are people that just happen to RSVP. Now let's talk about the data elements that are available to us. And in some cases, so again, for US targets, you see ICD-10, you see CPT codes, you see NDC codes. And NDC codes, and in working with Med Affairs leaders, NDC class codes or market basket seem to be an acceptable level versus, say, a molecule code. And so just think broadly about NDC here, deciling them, the targets by the market basket class, and then also institution. So taking a US target approach, that's third-party data that we can look at. Let's, on the far right of the slide, let's just have a quick look here. Targets who attend the disease state education, they do things at that education event as well, right? They have RSVP, they've attended, they may respond to a survey question, they may ask a question, they may download slides, they may save slides, take notes. And what certainly saving a slide tells you, or taking notes tells you, something really important, which is this slide mattered to this person. And there are several people who this slide mattered to. The question is, really, who are these people? Not by name, but tell me about those people, because there's a pattern here we want to try to find. In the case where they happen to be Medscape members, that you'll see in the center here, these are some things that we can add to the table, add to the assessment here. Lead concepts that are being consumed in news, reference, education, and search, and as well as registrational information. And further, in a recent acquisition, Medscape secured an organization that allows us to get a better sense of non-Medscape site behavior, and key terms and so forth. So where are our targets spending time outside of Medscape in other areas of their professional development? So thinking about all that data, and it might make it a little dizzy, but in reality, we've got to try to find some trends here. So again, you've got your event, you have your cohort A and B, and now we can look at a baseline that is a retrospective 6-month period of time. So what were those people, cohort A and B, what were they doing before they got there? Because we can't measure impact on their behavior if we don't know what they were doing before they got there, right? And so a baseline report would look at cohorts A and B as well as a comparator group, so that we can be sure we're looking at a real impact that can be measured against the general population. Now, you have the event. Now let's look at 3 months after the event, and let's look at that behavior we are looking for, and let's see what's happening in the 3-month time frame and 6-month time frame, because clearly, and while you cannot control for all the market events, you had one, or you could have a series, and let's understand what behaviors have happened and changed in a prospective way over the course of the 3 and 6-month time frame. So we're going to do this analysis. So think about all those data elements, the third-party data elements, the behavioral data elements, and the event data. And it's AI to me is simply clearly a tool. It's taking a lot of data, going back to the McKinsey report, and putting it into a tool that allows us to find the signals in the noise. And that is really what we are looking for, because we're going to find something, right? We have desired behavior, and we've already said what it looks like. We want it to increase diagnosis. That's what the thing is. And the reality is they're going to be the targets who come to this event who do take those new desired behaviors. They do increase their diagnosis. And running an analysis and looking for signals in that noise, they're actionable insights that come out of those patterns. Categorically, could be human resource related, global or regional strategy related, clinical development implications, commercial implications, right? Those are the categories that they're likely to fall into. And clearly, there are going to be people who do not take those desired behaviors. However, there's patterns there too, right? And looking for what might we be seeing there, and the same kinds of categories of insights. And let us not forget there's yet one more area, and that is comparing, contrasting these different results, the increasing or not increasing diagnosis, and what can that tell us? I mean, just thinking about finding all of that, again, signal in the noise, you can imagine then that there's a framework to consider looking at. And so I'm going to just orient you to this grid. So here's the idea. There's four categories across the top: med affairs, commercial, clinical development, and market access. And this is a question of who cares? Who cares about this data that you've come across, right? So there's the categories. There's the stakeholders, and then the categories we're suggesting fall into one of three. Now, I'm certainly open to hear about others, but just to give you a framework for thinking about it. And now the question is, are we finding things that are confirming or refining our current understanding? And if we have to refine, let's point to the data as to why that refinement is required. In human resources, for instance, field medical best practices might be something that you're seeing. You might see some geography needs. You might really even identify incremental thought leaders in the human resource category when you think about it. There's other resources needed category would be things like tools that might be required or helpful for an MSL while they are doing their work. And you can go across this grid and just look at and think about your insights to determine if you can think about it in these with this construct, then it's also helpful to kind of circle back then to those stakeholders as to why you're coming to them and what you're coming to them to do and to react to. So that actually, my friends, is the thought about starting with intentionality, deciding what you want the actions to be taken after exposure to education or any other market event, frankly, and then using a thoughtful approach to measuring it over time, and looking for those changes, and then analyzing for patterns of behaviors or patterns and themes that can help you and the organization better focus your resources. So, Kristen, that is what I have today. I don't know if there are other comments or questions. I'd certainly love to try to answer some.
Thanks, Chris. That was actually a very, very insightful presentation. And please submit your questions through the chat or feel free to ask a question. I have a thought for you.
Sure.
What's the best approach to teach others in the organization about what is an actionable item from the field? What kind of approaches have you taken?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing to land on, and it's going to sound pretty basic, I think, but it really is such an important aspect, is that you have a collective understanding. You articulate the understanding of what your intention is to do, and that's not done in a vacuum. So what is the KPI associated with the activity, right? And make sure everyone understands what that KPI is and points to it and says, yes, we all agree that is the KPI here. I know, Kristen, you spend a lot of time with MSLs, and I think the same actually applies with MSL training. What is the definition of the KPIs that everyone can align to say we want this activity or these MSLs, because this is a broad approach to do the following things, or to not do the following things, but to make the following impact. Now back into these are the things that they'll need to do in order to make that impact, and then lay out, here's my plan to do it. And I may very well be coming back to you, stakeholder, and saying, I'm looking for these things. I'm looking for things not only that are going to come back and help me refine our strategy in medical affairs, but I'm also going to be looking for some potential implications to commercial, or to, you to commercial colleague, and you to the clinical development colleagues or market access colleagues, right? There may very well be something for them as well.
It sounds like that identifying a KPI is actually really needs to be a collaborative process.
I believe that's exactly.
If you had to identify the buckets of people, who do you think are the key stakeholders internally that need to be there at the table really to identify that KPI?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it certainly starts in the Med Affairs, stream, if you will. But if you truly want to have buy-in, to the entire approach, then it does bubble over to commercial colleagues. So as it relates to your marketing colleagues as well as your sales colleagues, you and your team share that space, right? From an MSL perspective, you're sharing space with your sales colleagues. Anything you are going to find in a geography that you stumble onto is going to have implications not just to the MSLs in that area, but also to the salespeople in that area as well. And thinking further sort of down the line or up the line, depending on how you want to think about it, there's also the possibility of that implication to your marketing colleagues as well. And if you can share with them what your intentions are to do and have a conversation about their KPIs and what you might stumble on that might affect their KPIs, actually. So the conversation isn't just, here's the KPIs I am looking to operationalize here, but what are your KPIs in the space so that I can be on the lookout for things that might be of interest to you. So I think it's the opportunity for a dialogue that's ongoing and transparent.
Have you noticed a difference in this process operating from a virtual versus a live format? I imagine that previously that, you could get colleagues together live pre-COVID, but have you noticed any best practices from that type of dialogue between live and virtual?
Yeah, so, if you want to talk about a ubiquitous situation, right? COVID has affected everyone everywhere, seemingly, all around the world. Um, and what I think if I could say it this way, and I personally been affected with, family members and so forth, so I don't say this lightly, but there has been some upside to our having gone through this experience. It has not all been downside. And what I mean by that is the opportunity for people to get access to information that they previously couldn't have. And I'll give you for instance, um, democratization of information, because everyone can get access to things in the digital space because meetings have been canceled and so forth. It's all been there, right? Now, think back to before the pandemic hit, and we did have a number of live meetings. If you weren't there, you didn't get it. Now, people reported out, there were some things, news and so forth still comes out. But the reality is, if you weren't there, you were missing out. And now everyone has sort of access to everything in equal measure. So that's what I mean by the democratization of it. I actually think, Kristen, what we're about to come into now, and I think we're all not sure about exactly what's going to happen with the Delta variant and what is going to happen or not going to happen. But let's just pretend that we are going to continue to be able to be out and about in some limited fashion. I think what you're going to see is hybridization of this approach. I think you're going to have, because people are no longer going to want to meet in 2,000 room conference centers and things like that. I mean, think about a plenary session at a Congress of your choice, and it wouldn't be uncommon, especially at late-breaking trials, to have 1,000 or more people in a room. I don't think people are going to be happy to be inside with 1,000 people that they don't know that well. But I do think they're going to still want that data, and they're going to want it in smaller groups. So I think we'll have, plenary sessions that might be a virtual situation and remote situations where there are live meetings and gatherings of people, because I know our members, and I suspect everyone else is hearing this as well, are saying, we want to have some experiences interacting with our peers. That is what is being lost at the moment. And so that's what I think we have for the future, Kristen.